Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 34, all about Doctor Aphra. So for clarity, I'm going to be tackling the first 6 issues of the first run of Doctor Aphra comics, which are set just after the end of the first run of Darth Vader comics. Now for clarity, I would potentially recommend going back and listening to episode 30 that I did with Tony Farina of Indie Comic Spotlight, because we spoke about Aphra then in quite a good summarising way, explaining who she is, what she's kind of done and that sort of thing, as it's a sort of introduction. So if you haven't read the Darth Vader comics, or you haven't listened to my previous episodes about the Vader comics, which is where Dr. Aphra is introduced, listening to episode 30 will give you a good general introduction to her. I'm going to go into some of the details for her in this as well, but I would just recommend that if you haven't already listened to previous episodes and you have no idea who Dr. Aphra is, as I said, episode 30, where I was speaking with Tony, and then also the episodes with Darth Vader, or rather the Vader comics, are episodes 15, 17, 19, 23, and the finale is episode 29. Also, you could listen to the Doctor Aphra audio drama, which is essentially the Vader comics, but from the perspective of Doctor Aphra. It's got some additional scenes and a few things like that, but it kind of serves as an introduction for people who don't want to go back and read all of the Darth Vader comics and things. So just want to clarify that to you guys. I've put some details of that in the show notes as well, but I want to clarify that to any listeners who maybe don't know who Aphra is really, and wanted a bit of information before getting into the comics. So just a few bits and pieces of information here about Aphra. As I said, she was introduced in Kieran Gillen's 25-issue Darth Vader series, which is set between 0 and 1 ABY, which is 0 to 1 years after the Battle of Yavin, which is basically episode 4, A New Hope. There is a second Aphra run that started in May of 2020. There's about 6 or 7 issues of that out at the moment, and they take place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, which I'll be tackling them at some point in the future, but for the time being, there's no need to get into those until I've obviously clarified all these ones. Dr. Aphra also appears in the short story The Trigger, which is in the Certain Point of View book for A New Hope, so I would recommend checking that out too. Dr. Aphra's name is Dr. Chelly Lonna Aphra, which is confirmed I think in the 3rd issue of this comic. She was born approximately 24 years before the Battle of Yavin, so in these comics she's 24, 25 years old, and also her sexuality is actually something that comes into the comics quite a lot, and it seems like she is a homosexual. There's no clarity if she potentially is bisexual. She hasn't explicitly had any in-comic relationships with men, but there is some very clear, at the very least, touched upon relationships. She had something going on with Sana Starros, who is in the main run of Star Wars comics, and also in this series there is someone who she does kind of get involved with, but I won't mention that because it's not for several more issues yet. 3 supporting characters for Dr. Aphra. There is 000, who is a protocol droid with the 000 matrix put in them. This is all clarified in the Vader comics, but essentially imagine a C-3PO, but a complete maniac, a homicidal droid. Although he speaks with etiquette and he looks a lot like 3PO, he's basically a grey 3PO, a dark grey 3PO with red eyes, and he's got like syringes in his hands and all kinds of other horrendousness, and he loves draining the blood of people, so that's fun. Essentially, he was created God knows how long ago, and he basically killed all his creators and things, disappeared for several years, and they managed to find him, get rid of the Matrix, which made 000, hid it away on a quarantine world for a long period of time, and then Aphra basically found it around the same time that Vader did, and that's how Vader and Aphra's turbulent relationship began. I want to clarify relationship in a sense of working professional relationship. At the end of the Darth Vader series as well, she fakes her own death because essentially Vader tries to kill her, and he does it in a certain way that she kind of wanted him to, so she could get away with it. So for full clarity, if you're wondering how she managed to work with Vader and get away, that in layman's terms is how. Also, there's BT1, this nickname BT, who was created by the Tarkin Initiative. And Tarkin Initiative is basically the people, or rather the organisation within the Empire, obviously Tarkin being one of the main drivers for this. They basically created the Death Stars and lots of other crazy weaponry and things that the Empire used. And BT1 is basically a homicidal R2-D2. It's called the Blastomech, or the Blastomech prototype. It's basically R2-D2, but instead of having like a few things in that kind of help it being an astromech, it's got rocket launchers and flamethrowers and blasters, and it is basically more crazy than 000 is. So you've got these two counterparts who are basically the most opposites to R2-D2 and C-3PO you could almost get, and then the only other person sort of with Aphra generally is Black Cassantin. Black Cassantin is a Wookiee bounty hunter who was disgraced by his people of Kashyyyk, and he fled and basically became a bounty hunter. He was also in like fighting pits and things, and then he wanted to get revenge on his masters. There's like a whole other plotline with that. And just to clarify, I go a bit more in depth about Black Cassantin in episode number 32, which I tackle the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi, because while Obi-Wan was on Tatooine, he actually interacts with Black Cassantin, giving him his famous scars on his face. So that's a really cool, fun story to check out as well. And they're basically the main background characters of this. Also in this series, you do get, or in this arc of the 6 issues, you do get information about Doctor Aphra's dad, but he is like there, so I'll be talking about him as and when he comes up. And just for clarity, you'll be able to get this from the very start of this comic, but when Kieran Gillen created Doctor Aphra, he specifically was trying to get the anti-Indiana Jones. So if you say, for example, a way of explaining it, Indiana Jones is like 80% a good guy and 20% not necessarily a bad guy, but maybe a bit morally ambiguous, maybe a bit not great. You kind of flip that with Aphra, so she's like 80% not moral and has that 20% sort of morality in her, in a sense. I wouldn't say Aphra is necessarily a bad person, but she's definitely not a good person. She is a survivor. She'll do anything she needs to survive. She hasn't got a problem killing people, but she's not like masochistic or sadistic or anything like that. She doesn't want to hurt people because she loves the thrill, or torture people, or go around murdering children or anything crazy like that. 000 and BT1, however, do like to do that sort of thing, but Dr. Aphra doesn't necessarily. It's always just things she feels like she kind of has to do. And this series as well, it runs alongside the main run of Star Wars comics. For clarity, the first run of Vader comics, done by Kieran Gillen, that introduced Aphra, there are 4 collections of it, 5 if you include the Vader Down crossover, but essentially there's 4 main stories about it, and they run alongside the first few volumes of the main run of Star Wars comics. Then these Aphra comics run alongside the next batch of the main run of Star Wars comics, still in the first run of those issues that were out from 2016 that I think finished around the end of 2019. So there is a second run ongoing at the moment, which I'll get into another time. But essentially, if you want it chronologically, the main run of Star Wars comics, which I think is 75 issues, the first 4 volumes of those mirror time-wise the first 4 volumes of Darth Vader and include the Vader Down crossover, and then subsequently you've got the Aphra comics, which then follow the rest of the Star Wars comics. And when the Star Wars comics come to an end, there's this big special called Empire Ascendant, and it combines Doctor Aphra, Darth Vader, Star Wars, and is like a prologue to Bounty Hunters as well, which is another comic series that's ongoing. So I'm trying on this show to progress everything that I'm doing as a constant basis, as in things that aren't just one-shots or mini-series, things that are ongoing series. I'm trying to do them chronologically so that if you're reading along on things, that they all kind of marry up at the same time, and then they should all finish at the same time, which will give me ample time to delve into other things. And so this Aphra series is going to be something I tackle once a month. Basically it's going to be this week is Aphra, the next week will be either a mini-series or a couple of one-shots, the week after that will be continuing the main run of Star Wars comics, the week after that mini-series or one-shots again, and then the week after that, which will be 4 weeks from now, is going to be the second edition to Aphra. So that's basically how it is, and that's enough preamble for the start of this, but I just want to give people information because obviously it is the first time I'm talking about Aphra, and just in case you were not familiar with everything to do with her, there you go. If you're still any confusion on this matter, please just contact me, email me, contact me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat, anything like that, and I can explain better, or you can look up for yourself. I'm more than happy either way. I wanted to also add that in the first issue of Doctor Aphra, the first sort of half of the comic is just standard, like air quotes, present day, and then the last part of the comic is actually like a sort of epilogue, in a way. It's basically just like it's sort of a prequel. It kind of explains when Aphra got her doctorate and the sort of things she did to get there. I'll get into that when I get there, essentially, but I want to clarify that as well, in case people thought I'd be skimming that. So, with Dr. Aphra, as I've said before, Kieran Gillen was the writer, Kev Walker is the artist for this, and Antonio Fabella is the colorist. The first issue was released in December 2016, and issue number 6 was released in April 2017. The trade paperback collection of those 6 was released in July 2017, and then Volume 1 hardcover was out October 2018. Now, the hardcover has got basically the same as what the trade paperback had, but it also has the Screaming Citadel crossover within it. I will be tackling the Screaming Citadel, I think, in 2 weeks' time, and that's basically a crossover between the main run of Star Wars and Doctor Aphra, so you get to watch her interact with the main rebels, if you will. But if you have been paying attention with the previous issues of Star Wars and things like that, Aphra is in a previous few issues, but if you go back and check out the previous episodes, it'll all be confirmed. She's only in like a small arc. So I'm going to read the title crawl now. Aphra, Book 1. It is a period of opportunity. In a galaxy oppressed by the cruelty of Imperial forces, there is little hope for the future. But for those used to operating on the fringes, there is much potential for profit. Rogue archaeologist Doctor Aphra is no stranger to risk in the pursuit of both credits and thrills. From her recent acquisition of a pair of homicidal droids, to her ever-increasing debt to the Wookiee warrior Black Cassantin, and most of all, her secret work for Darth Vader, Imperial Enforcer and Dark Lord of the Sith. Now, having successfully faked her own death at Vader's hands, Aphra is back to doing what she does best, locating and liberating rare artifacts, droid and Wookiee companions by her side. So the start of this comic, I'm not going to go into too much depth about the first few pages, it's really cool to look at, but it is essentially a figure wearing a mask / a helmet in body armor, doing basically Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones. You know, going through a temple, getting away from booby traps, and the last thing is like a giant boulder thing chasing them. They manage to get out alive, pat themselves off, take the helmet off, and then someone shoots them and they die. The person who shoots them is Aphra, who collects the prize, which immediately, if any of you have seen Indiana Jones, you know that it flips it right on its head. So on Fulan Row, the Cosmotanic Steps, which is where Aphra's been in previous comics, mainly in the Vader comics, she was there at one point, and it shows up occasionally again. Aphra presents the trophy she's got, which is the archaeological find after killing that guy, to 000 and BT1, and basically says, look, I can sell this for some stuff. Aphra is confronted by a gentleman called Su Tath and 2 of his guards, and essentially he says that she owes him a lot of money, and she says, well, she's going to sell this artifact and she'll, get him his money. He says, well, just give me the artifact and that will sort things out, and she's saying, well, this is an archaeological find. Whatever you sell it for is probably going to be for almost nothing, whereas if I can take it to the right places, I can get a decent amount of money for it. He doesn't take no for an answer. He is adamant that he wants that thing, and then he tells his guards to kind of get it from her. She points over to a different direction, says, look, the Death Star, and tries to run. She gets swatted by one of the guards, and then Black Cassantin is watching, and basically he gets involved. He basically beats up the guards, because obviously Wookiees are pretty ferocious, and Black Cassantin is especially ferocious. He beats up the guards and things, and Aphra says to him, look, I'm really sorry about that. I'll give you a little bit of extra payment to get your Gigorans fixed up when I get back. And he says, okay, well, we all know you've been hiding from the Empire. It'd be a shame if they were to find out where you were. Aphra asks Black Cassantin how long it's going to take to basically sort the Archangel number 2 out, get it up and running, and he says it's going to be a few hours. While that happens, 000 and BT1 say, can we just go and pick up some supplies from the town and things while I've got time? And she's like, yep, sure, go ahead. 000 then ends up following this gentleman Su Tath and injects him with a neurotoxin. And as he's dying on the floor, 000 says, I'm enjoying my time in the company of Master Aphra, and as long as that remains true, I'm not going to let anything interfere with it. Let's hope that the gangster ruffian who replaces you is a bit more polite. And as I said, he does that in the bathroom so no one else notices, and this guy just dies on the floor. Aphra goes to Archaeo Prime, still in the Cosmotanic Steps, basically going to a place to sell her archaeological find. She attempts to sell this, and is told that she can't sell it. The droid says, look, I'm sorry, Miss Aphra, and she's like, no, Doctor Aphra. And the droid says, nope, it's Miss Aphra, your doctorate has been suspended, and until that confusion, allegedly, has been cleared up, I can't buy anything off you because we can't verify your finds. I've triple checked, and there's nothing we can do. Aphra says to herself that it's not going to get anything on the black market, it's terrible, and is trying to figure out, how this happened. And 000 is like, well, it must be, terrible to have your credentials questioned. And she said, well, yeah, I mean, I obviously cheated, but how on earth did they find out? And you hear someone approach, and they say, well, your questionable morality was always going to catch up with you, beloved. So perhaps it was lucky that someone who loved you has uncovered your ethical lapse, and now we can look for your spiritual salvation. And Aphra turns around and says, Dad. Oh. And that's where the sort of first part of that comic ends. However, there's still quite a lot to go, which is essentially this sort of prologue, epilogue-y thing, which is talking about how Aphra got her doctorate. So while Aphra is in college/university, depending on where you're from and what term you prefer to use, when she's getting her education and getting her doctorate, she basically goes to this temple trying to find this thing, which there's an architecture that hasn't changed and it's been around for like as long as the Republic. She's incredibly excited to see, what sort of stuff is going to be there. She bases her whole doctorate on that. She gets there and there's nothing there. She doesn't get along with the teacher of hers, or the professor, or however you want to word it. Savar, I think the term is. And essentially, he's saying, look, your findings are terrible, and I'm going to show you up in front of everyone to prove how much of a fraud you are. But before he actually does that to her, he shows her to kind of show off his collection of Abyssin Symbiotes. These symbionts are classified and they're beyond quarantine, and to even have them is basically terrible. They're all in these little pods and things, so they can't really get out or anything, and he's basically just showing her up to say, look, I'm a true archaeologist, I really care about these things, and I can achieve great things. All these years that you've mocked me for things like this, I can finally turn it around, because I'm never going to let you become a doctor. And it's, although your work is sloppy and my standards are high, I just hate you, and that's why I'm never going to let you get the doctorate. And as she leaves, he says, enjoy your life of failure. A couple of days later, a friend of Aphra's from the college goes up to the Savar and says to him, look, oh my god, you wouldn't believe that what Aphra's found in this place. It's a vault full of Abyssin Symbiotes. It's amazing. I mean, how could they have possibly got there? This is incredible. How could all these things happen? And the Savar goes to his vault, sees there's nothing in there, and Aphra's hiding around and says, ooh, the tricky alarms, they should have probably gone off, wouldn't it? And he's saying, well, you won't get away with this, I'll reactivate them and things. And Aphra says, well, they've already been disintegrated. The Imperial protocols and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, if anyone asked where we got the symbiotes from, if it came to light that I'm actually fraudulent, well, I think it'd be bad news for everyone. And that sort of thing ends with, obviously, Aphra's managed to pull one over on him and easily manages to get the doctorate. And the last couple of panels is that friend of hers saying, oh, Aphra, I'm really proud of you. I'm going to devote my entire career researching this. I'm going to find out whatever it is on booth 12 that negates the symbiotes. If I'll be there for decades, I'll be there for decades. And Aphra's like, okay, cool. Well, have fun with that. And that's where the comic ends. And I just want to clarify things before I get on to the next few comics and whatnot. The Aphra comics has got some incredible dialogue in it. The 000 in himself, the homicidal protocol droid, has some of my favourite lines in all comics in it. Aphra is, as Tony kind of described her in our chat in episode 30, he basically says she is kind of like a mixture between Indiana Jones, Han Solo, and Luke Skywalker in certain ways. She's got two droids with her, kind of like Luke has. She has a Wookiee with her, like Han does. And her and Han, they do interact in the Vader Down crossover, which is quite a fun reaction. But they're both kind of, scoundrels and pull one over each other. It's just that Aphra falls on the bit of the darker moral side of things, whereas Han Solo is, slightly more in a better light in a lot of ways. I also wanted to add that the Abyssin Symbiotes that I've mentioned in this, which the Savar basically had, they only really show up in the Doctor Aphra comics. This was the first time they've ever been mentioned in canon, and then also there is the Screaming Citadel crossover thing between Aphra and the main run of Star Wars, and they're in those as well, so kind of foreshadowing in some ways. Anyway, on to issue number 2. So this actually starts with one page, which is an 18 years ago flashback. And it's got Aphra's dad walking up to like some sort of hut and saying, oh my god, Aphra, what have you done? And what Aphra says is, wrong question, Dad, and in quotes, why are you here? Where's Mum? I'm here because the nice Imperials dropped me home. Mum's dead in a ditch on that alien world she took us to when she left you for being obsessed by old dumb stuff. Oh, and the psychologist says I may have some issues. Fair to warn you. So as you can tell, as Aphra's story goes on, you get little snippets and details about her life before being this rogue archaeologist. When she was working with Vader in the previous comics, she was very much just this sort of high roller going fast and not really looking back that much. But there are the odd moments, and I think I read out one of the parts where she does kind of open up a little bit. There's that vulnerability there, and that does come out more as the comics go on. So back to sort of present day, Aphra's dad says that he leaked Aphra's information when he found out what she did, and that loads of people have been spending decades of their lives researching how on earth those symbiotes got into that vault and things, and Aphra doesn't really care about that sort of stuff. Aphra takes him to her ship and says, let's talk about things, and then she immediately says to 000, you're up, droid. And 000 says, "Hello, I'm 000, and it seems your daughter is a genuinely horrible person. You must be very proud." And as he does that, his hands open and he's got a buzzsaw, he's got a syringe, he's got pincers, he's got one finger that's shooting out fire for some reason. So he's very, very happy about this. And as he goes towards Aphra's dad, she eventually does say, "Okay, no, don't." And 000 says, Did you just torture tease me, master? That is a little disappointing." And then Aphra and her dad talk about the Ordu Aspectu. And 000 asks who actually are the Ordu Aspectu. And Aphra's like, "Oh, don't ask him, no. And the dad's like, "Ignore little boop. Let me tell you about the Ordu Aspectu." And Aphra's dad then basically tells the story about what he thinks the Ordu Aspectu were. This pure versions of the Jedi. They were on this thing called the Fortress of Garn a long, long time ago. Ancient history sort of thing. And they're basically meant to be pacifists and things. And then these people appear with red lightsabers, assumably Sith, attack them all, and then the fortress disappears and never to be seen again. But then Aphra says, well, with the evidence that we've got, that may not even be the case. In fact, this could be what actually happened. And then she tells the story of the Ordu Aspectu being evil and kidnappers and killing people and things, and then the people who appear, instead of them having red lightsabers, the people who appear have blue lightsabers, and it's meant to kind of flip it on its head, saying the Ordu Aspectu, you don't really know if they were good or bad, you're just kind of making up your own assumptions with the very limited evidence that we have. And as I said, I'm not going to go into depth about that sort of stuff, but it's really cool when you read the comic. I always love that sort of, two versions, like two sides of the same coin sort of thing, which obviously happens in Last Jedi. Is one of the parts I really like, with the sort of recounting of Ben Solo and Luke Skywalker's interactions and things. It's kind of like that in some ways. Then Aphra's ship, the Archangel, manages to get to this sort of planet, and she says to her dad, "Okay, well, which one is it?" And he says, "Oh, it's the fourth moon." And she was like, "Well, it would have been easier if you actually told us where you're going rather than just kind of giving us coordinates." And he was like, "Well, I may be old and I may be idealistic, but I know you. You threatened to torture me. I've had to blackmail you to help me. I certainly don't trust you to get information when you need it." And he says, "This first stage should be the simplest. It's a lovely forest moon. It should be easy." They land on the moon and then go walking through some jungles and things. And then Aphra says, "Well, you said this should be easy. Well, look what's that over there." Gives him a pair of essentially binoculars, and it sees this big triangular temple, and there's Imperials everywhere. And he says, "I have no idea why Imperials would be on Yavin 4. And just in case you aren't as savvy with planet names as potentially I am, Yavin 4 is where the Rebel base was hidden at the time of A New Hope. And that's where the second comic ends. Just for clarity, Aphra's dad's name is Korin, Korin, and so we begin the third comic, and it's got a conversation between Aphra and Korin, and essentially he didn't even realise that the Death Star not only was a thing, but it actually blew up Alderaan. He said he thought it was just some sort of rumour in some ways, and they have some sort of back and forth and things, and Aphra says how horrendous it is, and then 000 kind of pipes up and says, "I thought you said, the Empire's fist around the galaxy can be helpful in certain ways." And she says, "If I wanted to take advice from like a murderer and a psychopath, I would have kept working for Darth Vader." And Corin's like, "You worked for Darth Vader?" So clearly he's been very much out of the loop. He's just been sort of in his studies a lot, trying to figure out things about the Ordu Aspectu, and really knows almost nothing about the outside world. They decide by trying to get into the temple they need a distraction, so they get Black Cassantin to go out and cause a distraction. It cuts to the Empire, and there's a person called Captain Tolvan, and she's the head of command there at that time, and then they basically say to her, "Look, there's some sort of rebel code potentially out in the forest, what should we do?" And she says, "Look, send a patrol out there." So patrol speeder bikes go out there, Black Cassantin destroys them pretty quickly, so they think, okay, right, clearly there's an attack going on, we need to go over there and counter the rebellion forces. So as that is happening, 000 and BT1 sneak in, while Aphra and Korin are kind of hiding at the tree line. And as I can rarely resist reading out 000 dialogue, I'm going to do some now. So you've got BT1 basically beeping a lot in between parts of where 000 is talking, and so I'm going to read from here. "Noah being inconspicuous, murder is most conspicuous, especially in your famously enthusiastic idiom. Yes, he could be dead now. Him too, yes, you are extraordinarily deadly. You are a very needy psychopath, BT." And they go in the hangar and see a protocol droid, and 000 says, "Oh, I loathe making small talk with career droids. Get the ventilation hatches open, BT." And as the ventilation shafts sort of open up, 2 ropes come down, and then Korin and Aphra abseil down. And in doing so, Korin slips and basically falls. Aphra manages to catch this small crystal thing, and 000 catches Korin. Aphra says, "This is a Masasi piece, right? You had it around the house. How long have you been planning this?" And Korin said, "Well, it's my life's work." And it cuts to the Empire, and it's got a scout trooper speaking to Commander Tolvin on the comms. It says, "We're losing troops, Captain. They've got us pinned down. There must be dozens of them." So she says, "Okay, send in a walker." And the walker starts shooting at Black Cassantin, who's sort of running away. And there's this sort of crack noise as the ATST walker steps on something, and this giant sort of worm thing flies out of the ground and hits the ATST, destroying it. So while that's happening, Aphra, Korin, and the 2 droids walk into the temple and things, and 000 says to a interrogator droid, "Oh, hello ITO, big fan of your work." They're the ones that you see in A New Hope and in a few other things where they basically are torture droids. They've got syringes that inject truth serum, they've got all kinds of horrible weaponry. They're just like floating orbs with big red eyes, and it's just funny, 000, whenever he interacts with anything. Korin and Aphra are talking as they're walking through this temple, and Aphra says, "Well, the Masasi have been extinct for like a millennia. I never knew why you wouldn't shut up about them." And Korin says, "Well, I believe there's a connection with the ancient Aspectu." So they come to this room, and there's just strange markings all over the floor, and Korin says, a lot of these seem very identical to some audio artifacts, and so they basically decide to start putting some of those strange crystal things into some of the holes in the floor. And Korin says to Aphra, "I wonder how Black Cassantin's doing," and she's like, "Oh, he's going to be fine." And it goes back to the forest where there's that ATST that's been destroyed, and the scouts are sort of looking around the ATST. They get asked on the comms if there's any survivors, and they're like, "Negative." And they go, "Wait a minute, is the scout walker missing its?" And then you've got Black Cassantin holding the chain gun blaster that was connected to the ATST, and is shooting that at the Empire now. And Aphra and Korin, they've put all the crystals in the place and things. Nothing really seems to happen. And then they look outside and they see these big beams of light that have connected lots of these pyramids. There's lots of these sort of temple sites, and these big beams of lights are connecting all of them. Aphra makes some snide comment, and the comic ends. So comic number 4 starts with Captain Tolvin noticing some sort of weird light reflection on one of the temples, noticing that Black Cassantin was a distraction, so they head back to the temple where they see some amount of light reflection from a smaller device, which turns out to be Korin taking some sort of readings and things while Aphra's trying to pull him away to get them out. The Imperials attack the temple. There's a bit of toing and froing with Aphra, her dad Korin, 000 and BT1, and they run about and they shoot and they throw grenades and all this sort of other jazz, and then eventually they basically get cornered by Captain Tolvin and a squad. Then behind them, because they're on this sort of ledge thing where you can see outside, an AT-80 comes up. An AT-80 is one of those big vehicles which you see on Empire Strikes Back, on Hoth. They're the ones that the snowspeeders wrap the cable ties around when they fall down. They're also on Scarif and Rogue One as well, but that's what they are. Black Cassantin saves the day by flying the Archangel 2 down and kind of shooting the AT-80, which distracts people, and then BT-1 sprays some smoke, and then they all get on the Archangel and fly away. Korin then confirms he has the coordinates for the next place, which is Rur's Citadel, and Rur seems to be one of the leaders of the Ordu Aspectu. So they head on the way down there, and it goes back to the Imperials. And Captain Tolvin is speaking with Admiral Ozzel, and Admiral Ozzel is someone that you'd recognise from the films, because in Empire Strikes Back, pretty close to the start, when the Empire attack Hoth, one of the Admiral's ships comes out of hyperspace too quickly and too close to the Hoth system, and therefore alerts the rebels to their presence. And obviously because of that, they manage to escape and whatnot. So because of that, Darth Vader chokes Ozzel over the sort of hologram intercom screen thing, and you watch him choke to death. He's got a little mustache on him, and he's in the comics a little bit, but that's really it from him in the sort of live action. He does mention to Captain Tolvin that she failed on Edu, and that is why she was assigned to Yavin 4. Now, for clarity, Edu was in Rogue One. It's the place that Jyn Erso gets reunited with Galen Erso shortly before he dies, because the rebels bombed the place. When you've got all the characters it's all rocky and rainy and things when they get there, that's Edu. So obviously, I like the connection to Rogue One, even if it's just in a passing comment. I also saw online it's mentioned that Captain Tolvin was an apprentice of Thanoth, who is the Inspector from the 2nd and 4th volumes of the first run of Vader comics, who does come to an untimely end from Vader, but she was an apprentice of that, and I think later on in the series it goes into a bit more depth about that. Then this comic ends with Aphra, Korin, 000, BT1 and Black Cassantin get into this giant asteroid that's been sort of almost cut in half, but the half that's been cut has got a citadel with these huge buildings sort of built on it. They land there and they can actually breathe the air, which is a bit peculiar, but obviously it's freezing cold. And they walk through and they find there's a ton of dust and there are corpses everywhere, but it's been such a long period of time, all that's left is essentially skeletons and dust. And that's where that comic ends. So issue number 5 starts with Captain Tolvin and a squad heading to the asteroid that Aphra and that lot are on, and in the meantime Aphra and the guys are basically exploring. Korin inspects one of the corpses and notices that it's an Orthodox Jedi and says it's very sad for them to have just died in this way, like slumped against a wall, clearly killed in some manner, because generally Jedi have a specific rite of passage or traditions on how they cremate their dead or anything like that. So he says that, and while he's doing that, Aphra starts to take a few lightsabers, and he's questioning, what on earth are you doing? And he's like, well, there's always collectors looking for second-hand lightsabers, and he's like, you're robbing corpses. And she says, what do you think I actually do, Dad? Archaeology is just grave robbing with fancy paperwork, and I've got debts to pay. And Black Cassantin chimes in there, and she says, okay, yeah, I know it's not all about the money. And she says that I promised to find the people who trained Black Cassantin to be a gladiator. He doesn't necessarily object to the lifestyle, he just objects to anyone controlling him ever. There's this massive blast door that has some text on it that says the Immortal Rope, so they think, okay, we need to find the generator to power it up so we can get through here. They try and find that, and what manages to happen is Korin's got one of those crystal fragment pieces that he used prior, and he pops it into one of these machines, and it starts up the generator. Korin does mention, however, that he left all the other crystals back at Yavin 4 because he didn't have time to grab them, or he was trying to, and Aphra pulled him away, and so this is the only one they've got. Korin asks Aphra if she can access some of the logs and things, and she says no, the core is still down, we've got power, but nothing more. Let's see if we can get this opened. So they go and try and find the computer core so they can open up everything in the temple, or the citadel rather, and they get into this room that connects directly to space. It's a pretty cool looking room. There's basically a giant crystal in the middle and almost like a spider web around it, but the spider web is not an actual spider web, it just looks kind of like one in the sense that there's thick lines going in lots of different directions, and it's made out of seemingly stone or something. So it's that sort of, you can kind of imagine almost like a spider web made out of stone that is gigantic, and in the middle there's this big pillar. And in between the sort of, in air quotes, webs, there is empty space. While they're looking around and things, the Imperials come up to them and start shooting at them from across the room, and Black Cassantin ends up trying to shoot them and slow them down, while Aphra and her dad try and go and find this computer core. Aphra puts the crystal they've got into this machine, and it makes the giant pillar in the middle sort of rise, and it seems to have done the job. Black Cassantin sort of sneaks away while this happens, while Aphra and the dad are looking at the pillar, and the pillar's raised by several meters, and now in doing so, there's this force shield thing around it so that you can actually walk up to it. But directly below the force shield that you can walk on is empty space. While they're all being shot at, Aphra gets a message from 000 saying that Black Cassantin is here and he's leaving you to this. He's taken the ship, and obviously 000 and BT are on there, and they basically abandoned them. Aphra and Korin are hiding in the middle part under where this lifted up pillar has been, hiding behind this barricade, shooting back occasionally, but the Imperials are gaining ground. As they're getting closer and closer, the Imperials start to walk on this force fieldy bit, which is how you got to the pillar, and Aphra has the idea to shoot the lever that started that, and it makes the force field disappear. All the Imperials that are walking on that then fall into space. And as that lever gets hit and the force fields disappear, the pillar in the middle then closes down, and Aphra and Korin are in the middle, and they go down this sort of strange elevator shaft to this green room, or rather room lit with a green crystal in the middle, and there's corpses all around along with some big droid things. They seem to be stuck in there, and they don't have any crystals, so it seems like they can't power anything up, and Korin speaks to Aphra and apologises for dragging her into that, and she's questioning, why do you care anyway? And he said, well, when all the Jedi died, I just wanted there to be something else, some other good in the galaxy, and I put all my faith in the Ordu Aspectu. He then apologises to Aphra about how he couldn't compromise with Aphra's mum, why everything that happened to Aphra happened, and he basically is saying he's sorry and that he forced her to come. After this sort of nice heart-to-heart in a way, Korin says if we ever make it out of here, I'll easily be able to get your doctorate reinstated. All you have to do is, and she immediately interrupts him and says, look, don't tell me yet, because if you tell me, then I may be tempted to just stab you and get it over and done with. And he's like, well, you wouldn't do that. And she says, you don't know me at all, Dad. And then as they're kind of staring at each other, she pulls a crystal out and says, so do we use a crystal to, sort this out? And he's like, what, why are we just talking about all that sort of stuff? And she says, look, we don't talk enough. It seemed like a good time with all the we may die in a minute sort of thing. But she does say, look, if you reboot this computer core and you put that crystal in there, there may be a reason why they've all turned off and everyone's sort of dead. So think about it before you pop that in there. She asks if he wants to do it that badly, and he clearly does because he puts the crystal in there. As that happens, this big spectre sort of face thing that's made out of green, seemingly fire and smoke and whatnot, is in the centre of the room, asks when it is, and they go, well, who are you? And he says, I am Rur. And they're like, you're not Rur, because Rur's corpse is like there next to us. And he says, that shell is the false Rur. He says, I am Rur, the eternal Rur. And his gaseous fire thing seems to sort of possess these giant droids that are near them. And just for clarity, the droids are pretty massive. The things I'd probably compare them to is maybe more of an obscure reference, but in the game's Bioshock, when there's the big daddies, they're like that. So they're several feet taller than a normal person, they are pretty wide, and they're very, very stocky. And as that starts to happen, Aphra says, this is going to be a sort of I told you so moment, and that's where that comic ends. And so we begin with the 6th and final issue of this arc. Rur seems to almost possess a lot of the dead droids that are around people, including where the Imperials are just kind of standing about looking at this big pillar thing that they can't get into, figuring out what sort to do next, and Captain Tolvin says, well, these holes next to us lead just directly into space. Let's bring the shuttle round and we'll go from there. And as they're saying that, all these droids come up, and then she's like, open fire on these things. It goes back to Korin and Aphra in this sort of undergroundy bit where the elevator shaft took them to with the crystals and the droids and whatnot, and Rur, all the droids from Rur keep asking, when is it? She says, look Rur, let's make a deal. I'll tell you when it is if you just tell me what actually happened. And he says, well, Torture would get that information out as well. And she says, yeah, but Torture would take a while. I will literally just tell you if you are just honest with me. Rur says that is logical and then goes on to explain what happened. There's a page or two of really cool artwork of showing what has happened, but he does give quite a big monologue and things. I'm going to read it all just now because it's really interesting for me personally hearing about other aspects of the Force, certain Jedi sects and things like that, when they came from, what their sort of mentalities and whatnot were. So instead of me just trying to paraphrase this, I'm just going to read it verbatim. So this is Rur. After the Entravia conflict between the Ordu and the Orthodox Jedi, the peace treaty allowed the Jedi to inspect the Ordu's work for signs of dangerous heresy. My present research was to create a copy of my intellect, preserving my knowledge for all time. I did not realise what I was actually doing. I was not copying, I was actually moving my sentience and leaving an evil ghost inside my fleshy body. And Aphra says, right, and you hid this from fake Rur, I presume. And Rur says, I knew he would deny the truth. It was only when the Jedi demanded a close inspection I knew I had to act. In my new immortal state, I was one with all the machines and able to control them as naturally as I once moved my limbs. It was all that could deliver me. I had to slay them all and escape. The Jedi fell. Amon and fake Rur survived. They swore to deactivate me, hiding their murderous intent behind pretty words. I sent the Citadel hurtling across the galaxy to make sure reinforcements could not locate us. Only the Ordu crystals could track our beacon, but the Jedi were not the Ordu, so I was safe. Amon stopped the generator before I could kill him, and fake Rur came for me. He couldn't bludgeon his way to the crystals without destroying the station, but his fake Rur still had force powers. He dislodged the crystal, and I soon lost all consciousness. It seems the droids acted on my final orders, purging the organics until their power ran out. For their individual batteries had failed, it must have been a considerable time. And he asks Aphra, well, when is it? And she says, well, what calendar are you familiar with? And he says, the Damantian Accord. She says, well, the Accord was ancient history long before the Republic was founded. That was 1,000 years ago. And Rur says, no, everyone dead. So long. I've lost everything. I had so many plans, such great designs for such weapons. They stole my life. I would have had an empire. They would have begged, I cannot punish the dead. I will punish the living. And so the droids start to attack Aphra and Korin. Aphra points the blaster at this sort of thing in the middle where the crystal is and where this weird ghostly face is kind of coming out of. She aims the blaster at him and it gets swatted away by one of the droids. Aphra says that the Imperials have a ship and we need to get over there essentially, and we need a crystal. We have no other options. And Korin says, look, just destroy the console and take the crystals from there. And Korin wrote to be careful because he says that if you turn this off, it's likely to stop the life support system and may lead to the destruction of the entire Citadel. Aphra then goes on the elevator and goes up to where the core is. She pulls out that lightsaber that she basically stole and then starts just slashing and swiping at all these droids that are coming for her. She takes this giant crystal out and loads of red lights start to flash and things, and then tries to get the bridge activated and things. She manages to because she has that one crystal left that activates the bridge and things, and she can see the Imperials are fighting off, and literally piles and piles of droids, as in they've destroyed so many droids by shooting at them. There is piles probably like 10 feet high surrounding them of just droid carcasses, essentially. Aphra says, look, come over here, trust us, you're going to die if you stay over there. So the Imperials pull back. The Imperials pull back, get to where Aphra is. Aphra takes that crystal out, and then the bridges all disappear. And Aphra says to Captain Tolvin, look, can you signal your ship and things and get us out of here? And she says, well, what have you done to your ship? She's like, oh, I lost it. It's kind of complicated. Just come on, let us out. Korin has been wounded in some way, but it's still it's not critical, it seems. They get on that ship, and Captain Tolvin says to the pilot, quick, disembark immediately, we need to get out of here. There's no response or anything, so they go into the cockpit, and it shows that all of the pilots and things are all dead. There's this droid in the background, which is a protocol droid. It's not the same as C-3PO, it's kind of got like a more bug-eyed one. There's a character called AP5 in Star Wars Rebels, so that's the kind of protocol droid it is, and they've got glowing green eyes. It says the Eternal Ruh and swipes for Tolvin, smacking her down, and then it chokes Aphra. It's got her in a quite bad chokehold. Aphra's starting to sort of fade out as the ship just manages to get out and fall out of where the Citadel is. The Citadel then explodes, and as it explodes, the protocol droid gets their mind back and says, oh, I'm really sorry, I was not cleared to strangle you. Aphra takes a moment and says, oh good, we're going to actually live. And Tolvin turns around with the rifle and says, who are you? While Tolvin is pointing the blaster at Aphra, Korin manages to grab the lightsaber that Aphra used previously and stabs Tolvin in the shoulder, which makes her collapse. They then dump Tolvin and the protocol droid on a place where it says a long way from anywhere in the outer rim, so we don't even know what planet it is, but just drop her there along with like a bag and some supplies, and Aphra says, look, killing you is the only smart move, but you are cute. And Tolvin is just left there with the protocol droids as the Imperial shuttle that Aphra and her dad are flying get out. And her dad turns to Aphra and says, you have a very bad taste in women. And Aphra says, well, that runs in the family. Aphra and her dad have a discussion about the crystal and what to do with it next. Korin is saying, well, it could be pure evil, reactivating it could cause way more problems. And Aphra saying, well, if it was in the right hands, could it not help? And they're kind of debating what they think they could do with it. Aphra says that she knows some guys that could hold on to it for a while, and they go to the Quarantine World 3 in Caladan space, which seems to be the place where she initially went and took the 000 personality matrix in the Darth Vader comics. Korin hands over the crystal, a droid puts it in this huge amount of drawers and things. It's almost like, if you remember in Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark, and there's a warehouse full of boxes, kind of that almost mixed with the Matrix, but instead of people and pods, it's just walls and walls of different shaped drawers and things. It's all completely flat, but there is just miles of it. It gets put in a little drawer and closed away on this quarantine world. They get out of there, and then Korin thanks Aphra, and Aphra's like, don't get all mushy on me, just reinstate my doctorate, please. Aphra then goes to the Cosmotanic Steps, where she was right at the start when she tried to sell that artifact she found. As her doctorate is reinstated, she gets some credits from those lightsabers she stole from the Citadel, and then goes and speaks to that gentleman right near the start, who had the bodyguards and was like threatening Aphra, and then 000 end up killing him. His brother is there, who looks almost the same. She gives him the credits, and as well as 10% extra. He said, well, you said you'd return immediately. She said there were complications, and he's like, well, fine. There's always complications with you, Aphra, but you've paid off your debt, so you can leave. But also, where is that ship of yours that you've now settled the debt for? She says, good question, and then just kind of sits there drinking, and then Black Cassantin shows up with 000 and seemingly BT-1. She asks him if he's still got the Archangel. He makes a Wookiee growling noise, and she says, look, it's no hard feelings, you've got to save your own skin. And the way the comic ends is Doctor Aphra says to Black Cassantin, I heard a rumour that a bad lady did a terrible thing. You know the dangerous Ordu piece that she was meant to put safely into quarantine? She only handed over a fake. Let's get rich. And she's holding the Ruh crystal. And that is where the Aphra comic ends. For clarity, the next ones are going to be the Star Wars, main run of Star Wars, and the Doctor Aphra crossover in the story called The Screaming Citadel. Now, for clarity, The Screaming Citadel is actually the point where I started reading the main run of Star Wars comics, because I'd read these Aphra comics after a friend of mine bought me 3 variant covers of issue number 1. I got into Aphra, thought it was really cool, did a crossover with the main run of Star Wars comics, started buying the Star Wars comics from there, and that's really where my comic collection started with all these Star Wars things. So I'm quite excited. I remember The Screaming Citadel was a really fun comic, and it is really good to get Aphra interacting with Luke, Leia and Han as well. And just for clarity, what we've got coming up. So next week I'm actually going to be doing I believe, the Age of Republic one-shots. There's one for Jango Fett, and there's another one for General Grievous. I'm going to be doing that because Jango Fett, if anyone's been watching The Mandalorian, is to somewhat degree connected with what's going on in The Mandalorian, so I thought I would just do that. It's quite apt. And the Grievous one as well is a cool one, and so, doing one comic probably isn't enough for a whole episode, so I'd probably be able to do two quite easily. So that would be episode number 35. The following week, in episode number 36, I'm going to do the Screaming Citadel, which is, I've said, the crossover event between Star Wars and Doctor Aphra. And then I believe that the episode after that, which would be number 37, I'm probably going to do either the Lando Double or Nothing comics, or I'm going to do the Age of Republic comics with Padme and Anakin. I think I'm probably going to do the Lando ones, just to kind of keep it mixing up a little bit like that. And then in number 38, I believe I'll be going to Aphra number 2. And then from there, I'll kind of bounce backwards and forwards between Star Wars, the main run, and Doctor Aphra. And then obviously alternate weeks are going to be more of the Age of Republic, which will go into the Age of Rebellion and Age of Resistance. And then the other few little mini-series I have not yet done, which is Thrawn, Lando Double or Nothing, TIE Fighter, and a couple of others. So that's really what you can expect from the next few weeks of Star Wars comics in canon. And I want to remind everyone that we are still doing a weekly Mandalorian show. The first 2 episodes were with Chris and Dave of the TV and movie show on Comics in Motion. This week's one is going to be with Scott and Chris, and I recorded a little 10-minute snippet with it just to give some extra information about the Mandalorian, about a certain character that appears in it, as well as some more information of just nuggets of information, as Dave calls it. And then on the 4th episode of our Mandalorian weekly show, which is going to air under the banner of Star Wars Comics in Canon, I'm going to be on episode 4 talking about it with Dave, which I'm very, very excited for. So that's what you can look at for the future for this specific Star Wars Comics in Canon show and the little weird spin-off weekly Mandalorian show that we've all been doing as well. And the only other thing really to say is check out Genuine Chit-Chat. Well, it's my other podcast. It's not on this feed of Comics in Motion. It's its own thing. Just search for Genuine Chit-Chat and you'll find it. Interviews, well, I say interviews, conversations with loads of different people. There's different guests every episode, and it's just a lot of fun. It's like, as apart from Star Wars, it's one of my main passions, and I love doing it. I've had the guys from Comics and Motions on. I've had Tony. I've had Scott Weatherly is one recently, who's the person who's going to be doing the Mandalorian episode 3 show with Chris of Comics in Motion. There's loads of collaborations and whatnot going on. I've included a lot of them in the show notes of this episode, as well as all the other episodes, including the time I did the episode with Tony and Dave of Scott Pilgrim on the Comics in Motion TV and Movies episode. I've been on Indie Comic Spotlight a little while ago, and there's an upcoming episode I'm going to be on as well. Lots of different collaborations and things I've been involved with. So you can always email me or contact me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat. The email is either Star Wars Comics in Canon at outlook.com or Genuine Chit-Chat at outlook.com. They both go to the same inbox. I just did it for ease. And if you have any queries or questions about anything else of the show, or you have any recommendations or anything like that, please get into contact. I am more than happy to give you my 2 cents on anything like that. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. As always, make sure you check out all the other great shows on the Comics in Motions feed. And as always, may the Force be with you.